Sophie was 13 when her mother announced her engagement to Marcus. Her father had been convicted of manslaughter 5 months prior. He had made a phone call from the bar that night, despite not even having a drink. Sophie was with him at the time. He had stepped into the restroom, only to emerge minutes later, his face pale and clothes stained with blood. He yelled for someone to dial the police, and they arrived swiftly. Without much explanation, they cuffed him and led him away. The next time Sophie saw her father, he was behind prison bars. The whole thing never added up to her. He wasn't a violent man. He insisted he was innocent, and her mother's behavior after the conviction only deepened Sophie's doubts. Her mother introduced Marcus to their home almost immediately. On his first day there, she declared he was Sophie's new father, branding her real dad a monster. She warned Sophie to stay away from him for her own protection. At first, Sophie was torn about what to believe, but 5 months later, when her mother revealed she was marrying Marcus and insisted Sophie call him Dad, her conviction in her father's innocence grew stronger. That's when things took a darker turn. Marcus grew too comfortable. He started watching her intently during meals, his fork moving slowly as he commented on how quickly she was maturing, calling her a beautiful young lady. The worst part was her mother found it charming. When Sophie confided that Marcus made her uneasy, her mother brushed it off as teenage exaggeration. But her mother must have mentioned it to him, because that night, while her mom was asleep, Marcus entered Sophie's room. He gripped her wrist tightly, leaving red marks, and whispered, "You know what happens to girls who tattle?" Terrified, Sophie realized she couldn't trust her mother, so she kept it quiet. Around this time, she began another secret, writing letters to her father. She tucked them inside her school books and mailed them from a friend's house after classes. Her father replied through a prison email system to an account she set up without her mother's knowledge. Things escalated one particular Thursday. Sophie came home to learn her mother had changed her last name on all school records to Marcus's without telling her. "You'll appreciate it when you're grown," her mother said. That night, Marcus entered her room to celebrate their new family bond. He sat on her bed, placed his hand on her leg, and told her she should be thankful for a father who cared so much. Sophie shoved him away and locked herself in the bathroom until he was gone. She wrote to her father about the incident. His reply came on actual paper this time, the ink smudged in places, as if tears had fallen as he wrote. That letter nearly shattered her. But she held on to one hope, visiting him. His birthday was approaching. She asked her mother if she could see him, explaining it was just for one day, just a short visit. Her mother refused. Worse, she said they couldn't go because Marcus had tickets to a car show that same weekend and wanted them all to attend as a family. He even requested hotel rooms with adjoining doors. When Sophie insisted she'd rather see her father, her mother erupted, screaming that he was a murderer and she wasn't allowed to visit him. When Sophie defended her father, declaring his innocence, Marcus struck her across the face while her mother stood by silently. Sophie was forced to go on the trip. While she was asleep that weekend, the worst happened. Marcus slipped into her room, reeking of alcohol. This time, he didn't stop at touching her leg. His hand moved further. Sophie had never felt so violated and ashamed. The journey home left her feeling shattered. To make matters worse, the week they returned, her mother discovered the hidden letters from her father. She burned them in the backyard. As punishment for contacting him, her mother removed Sophie's bedroom door, claiming it was for supervision. Marcus, of course, took advantage. He'd linger in her doorway at night, watching her as she pretended to sleep. That was when Sophie truly broke. The next day, she slipped into the school library after hours to email her father. She sent a long, disjointed message, unsure what she hoped for. Maybe just to feel something again. She felt empty. But 2 weeks later, his reply came, lengthy and comforting. He assured her things would be all right. One line caught her attention. "Did you look where I told you?" Sophie was puzzled. Look where? She combed through his previous emails. Then she found it. In a recent message, sent after she'd asked to visit, he'd mentioned checking behind the attic radiator. She'd been too upset to notice it at the time. Now she made a plan and waited for her mother and Marcus's usual date night. The next week, they left. Sophie's hands trembled as she climbed to the attic with a flashlight. Behind the radiator, she found a plastic-wrapped notebook. She flipped to the page her father had marked, dated weeks before his arrest. In his handwriting, it said, "It's been weeks since I saw Laura and Marcus slipping into the bar together. I don't know how to bring it up." Sophie was stunned. Her breath caught in her throat. Then she heard a car in the driveway, and her heart froze. They were back early. Maybe the restaurant was packed, or they'd had a fight. Car doors slammed, and her mother's heels clicked on the path. Sophie's pulse raced as she pressed the notebook to her chest, realizing she had only moments to act. Marcus's heavy footsteps echoed on the stairs. Each creak of the floorboard sent a shock through her. Her hands shook so much she nearly dropped the flashlight, its beam dancing across the dusty attic planks. Sophie tucked the notebook under her shirt, its cover cold against her skin. She hurried toward the attic hatch, but she wasn't fast enough. Marcus's head appeared through the opening just as she reached the ladder. His dark eyes met hers. He stared for a long moment, his face unreadable in the dim light. Then he climbed up, his broad frame barely squeezing through the hatch. Sophie pressed herself against the wall, the rough wood digging into her back. The notebook pressed against her stomach beneath her shirt. Marcus scanned the attic slowly, his gaze lingering on the disturbed dust swirling like faint spirits. He noticed the shifted boxes near the radiator where she'd found her father's hidden notebook. He asked what she was doing up there, his voice steady but sharp, sending chills down her spine. She stammered that she was searching for her old, stuffed toys from childhood, struggling to keep her voice calm. He didn't buy it. She saw it in the way his jaw clenched and his fists tightened. He stepped closer, and she smelled the wine on his breath from dinner, mingling with his overpowering cologne, one her mother called pricey, but always made Sophie nauseous. He said she was a bad liar, just like her father. The words stung like a blow. Then he seized her arm, his fingers digging in painfully, and pulled her toward the ladder. She clutched the notebook tightly to keep it from slipping out. Her mother stood at the bottom of the ladder, arms folded, foot tapping irritably. She demanded to know why Sophie was creeping around like a burglar in her own home. Marcus said he thought she was hiding something. His grip on her arm felt possessive. He suggested searching her room. Sophie saw a glint of something sinister in his eyes. In a panic, she blurted out that she just wanted her old teddy bear because she couldn't sleep without her door. The words spilled out too quickly, too frantic. Her mother sighed, clearly exasperated but accepting the excuse, likely too tired for more conflict. That night, Sophie waited until she heard their snores, Marcus's loud rumble blending with her mother's softer breaths. The house settled into its familiar nighttime groans as she hid the notebook inside her pillowcase, feeling its edges press against her cheek as she lay down. She couldn't risk reading more with Marcus checking on her hourly, his silhouette appearing in her doorway like a clock's shadow. The next morning was Saturday. Her mother made waffles, humming off-key to a radio tune as if everything was normal. The ordinariness made Sophie's stomach churn. Marcus stared at her across the table, his eyes tracking her every move as she poked at her food. She excused herself to the bathroom, taking the notebook with her. She hid it in the toilet tank, wrapped in a plastic bag from under the sink. The cold water stung her arms as she secured it. On Monday at school, she slipped into the computer lab during lunch, telling her friends she had homework to finish. The room was quiet, except for the hum of outdated computers and the clocks ticking. She photographed each page of the notebook with her phone, tilting it to avoid the fluorescent light's glare. Her trembling hands made some images blurry. The entries spanned years, her father's handwriting growing more anxious over time. He wrote about his growing suspicions. Marcus's car parked on their street at odd hours, her mother's increasing distance. One entry mentioned finding a hotel receipt in her mother's bag while searching for mints. Another described Marcus showing up at the bar during her father's shifts, always sitting in the same corner booth, watching like a hunter. She uploaded the photos to a cloud account under a fake name. Her heart raced as the upload bar inched along. Then she deleted the photos from her phone, double-checking they were gone. She knew Marcus might snoop through her device. He'd been rummaging through her belongings more often. When she got home that day, he was in her room, sitting on her bed like he belonged there. He'd torn through everything. Her drawers were emptied, clothes strewn across the floor like scattered petals. Her mattress was flipped, the box spring bare. Even Sophie's old trinket box had been ransacked. Inexpensive necklaces and woven friendship bands lay jumbled together. Marcus demanded to know where it was, his voice low and menacing. She feigned ignorance, asking what he meant, forcing her face to show confusion instead of fear. He seized her shoulders and shook her roughly, her teeth snapping together. He growled that he knew she'd found something in the attic and that he wasn't a fool. Her mother walked in then, keys clinking as she called out a greeting. She surveyed the chaos in Sophie's room, her brows arching. Marcus swiftly changed his demeanor, spinning a lie. He claimed he was helping Sophie tidy her cluttered room at her request. He flashed a hollow smile that never touched his eyes. Her mother accepted it, as she always did, likely because it was simpler than probing further. At dinner that evening, Marcus announced they were moving the wedding forward. Instead of next year, it would happen next month. He said he was eager to solidify their family. Her mother squealed with delight, clapping like an excited child. Sophie's stomach churned. The pasta on her plate suddenly seemed unappealing, almost gray. Over the following weeks, Marcus's surveillance intensified. He installed a camera in the hallway, aimed at the space where Sophie's door once hung. Its red light glowed like a sinister eye. He began driving her to and from school, eliminating her bus rides with friends. He waited in the parking lot, engine idling, scrutinizing everyone she spoke to. At night, he confiscated her phone, placing it on his bedside table, out of her reach. But Sophie kept working in secret during the day. She printed pages from the notebook at school, stashing them in her locker, taped behind old textbooks. She desperately needed help but didn't know who to trust. Her teachers seemed oblivious. Her friends wouldn't grasp the situation. Then she thought of Uncle James, her father's closest friend since their school days. A reliable man who always lent a hand without being asked. They'd been thick as thieves until her father's arrest. After that, her mother cut him off, claiming he was a negative influence who fueled her father's supposed violent streak. Sophie knew that was nonsense. Uncle James was kind. He smelled of wood shavings and always carried peppermint candies in his pocket. He worked in carpentry and had 3 kids, twin boys and a young daughter who called Sophie her big cousin. She found his number in an old address book her mother had overlooked in the kitchen's junk drawer, buried under expired receipts and dead batteries. Using the payphone outside school during gym class, she called him. The metal receiver was cold against her ear. She told her teacher she felt queasy and needed air, clutching her stomach for effect. Uncle James picked up on the 3rd ring, his rough voice softening when Sophie identified herself. She spoke quickly, words tripping over each other, explaining she needed help, that her father was innocent, and that she had evidence. He told her to slow down and take a breath. Then he arranged to meet her at the public library after school the next day. If her mother asked, he'd say he spotted Sophie walking and offered her a lift. His calm, steady tone gave her a flicker of hope for the first time in weeks. Marcus grew suspicious when Sophie mentioned staying late for a group project. He interrogated her about her group members, the project's topic, and the teacher who assigned it. Her history teacher confirmed her story when Marcus called. Likely irritated at the interruption during prep time, Sophie hurried to the library, her backpack thumping against her back. Uncle James waited in the parking lot in his weathered pickup truck, its blue paint chipped, but the interior spotless. He looked older than she recalled, with more silver in his beard and deeper creases around his eyes. She showed him the notebook's photos on her phone, scrolling through them rapidly. His expression darkened with each image, his hands tightening on the steering wheel. He said he'd always suspected something was wrong with her father's arrest. The story never added up. Too many gaps, too convenient. He asked if she still had the original notebook. Sophie told him where she'd hidden it, and he nodded approvingly. He stressed they needed more than just hunches. Solid proof, witnesses, something undeniable. He knew people who were at the bar that night. Maybe they saw something the police overlooked. Over the next 2 weeks, Sophie met Uncle James at the library 3 more times. Each meeting felt like a covert operation. She glanced over her shoulder and took different paths. He'd tracked down Mike, the security guard on duty that night. Mike was a burly man with gentle eyes and a keen memory. He recalled seeing Marcus at the bar, which was odd because Marcus claimed he was home watching TV all evening. Mike said Marcus entered the restroom just before her father, maybe 30 seconds earlier. But Mike had stayed silent after the arrest, too scared to get involved. He also feared Marcus, who seemed to have connections everywhere. Uncle James also found Lisa, the bartender, working that night. She had short blonde hair and a knack for remembering faces. Lisa said Marcus had been visiting the bar for weeks prior, always inquiring about Sophie's father's schedule while acting friendly. She found it strange but dismissed it at the time. Patrons often asked about regulars. Lisa recalled Marcus ordering a gin and tonic that night, then vanishing briefly before the body was discovered. She was the one who dialed 911, her hands trembling so much she could barely press the buttons. The real breakthrough came when Uncle James spoke to Frank, the bar's manager. Frank, an older man who'd run the place for over 2 decades, mentioned they'd installed a new security system a month before the incident. The police only took the main camera footage, but there was a secondary system recording the hallway near the restrooms. Frank still had those files on an old hard drive in his office, forgotten behind stacks of liquor receipts. They met at Frank's house to view the footage. His living room smelled of tobacco and stale coffee. Sophie's stomach twisted as Frank plugged the drive into his laptop. The timestamp showed Marcus entering the restroom at 9:47 p.m., strolling in casually, like he had all the time in the world. Her father entered at 9:52 p.m., likely just needing the restroom after his shift. Marcus exited at 9:51 p.m., glancing at his watch and adjusting his jacket. Her father emerged at 9:53 p.m., blood-soaked and shouting for help, his face etched with panic and horror. It was unmistakable. Marcus had 4 minutes alone in that restroom, more than enough time to orchestrate a setup and frame her father. Uncle James copied the footage onto several USB drives, his movements precise and deliberate. He warned Sophie they had to be strategic about their next steps. They couldn't just go to the police, Marcus might have allies in the department, people who owed him favors. They needed an ironclad case first. He told her to act normal at home and not betray what she knew. It was the toughest thing Sophie had ever done, but Marcus seemed to sense a shift. Maybe she wasn't a good enough actress, or maybe he was just paranoid. His aggression escalated. One night he entered her room and sat on her bed, the mattress sinking under him. The hallway camera couldn't see him from that angle. He said he knew she'd been sneaking around with Uncle James. Someone had spotted them at the library, likely one of his buddies who seemed to be everywhere. He warned that if she didn't stop, her mother could get hurt. His tone was casual, like he was discussing the forecast. Accidents happen, he said. People trip on stairs, cars lose their brakes, gas lines fail. Sophie understood the threat, a cold weight settling in her chest. She was terrified but kept her composure, her breaths steady. She told Uncle James at their next meeting, speaking in a hushed tone despite being alone. He said they had to act quickly. He'd shared their findings with her father's attorney, who was optimistic but careful. The lawyer said they needed the original notebook to prove the photos weren't altered. Sophie vowed to retrieve it, though the thought made her nauseous. That night, she waited until 3 a.m., watching the red digits on her clock tick by slowly. Sophie tiptoed to the bathroom, her bare feet silent on the rug. She carefully retrieved the notebook from the toilet tank, still sealed in its plastic, undamaged by water. Her father's words were secure. She tucked it into her school backpack, zipping it into a hidden pocket. But as she stepped out, Marcus loomed in the hallway, a dark silhouette. He demanded to know why she was awake. His eyes gleamed in the shadows. She clutched her stomach, claiming she felt ill. He stared for a long moment before stepping aside. She felt his gaze boring into her as she hurried to her room. The next morning, her backpack was missing. She found it in the kitchen, its contents dumped across the table. Marcus sat there, the notebook open before him. He flipped through its pages with mock curiosity. Her mother sat nearby, pale and bewildered, scanning the words. Marcus told her mother that Sophie had been crafting lies about him, that she was troubled and needed professional help. He pointed to specific entries. "Look how she's mimicking your husband's handwriting," he said. "See how she writes about you and me together? It's her twisted way of trying to tear us apart." Her mother's confusion hardened into anger. She bought his story. She said she was ashamed of Sophie, that inventing lies about Marcus was disturbed. She thought Sophie was coping better with her father's absence. Sophie tried to explain that it was her father's notebook, but her mother wouldn't hear it. She accused Sophie of forging her father's handwriting to frame Marcus, because she couldn't accept him as her new father. Her mother insisted Sophie needed therapy, maybe even a boarding school for troubled teens. Marcus suggested his cousin ran one in another state. Strict, remote, ideal for correcting kids who lied and caused problems. His tone sent a chill through Sophie. The room seemed to shrink, her vision blurring slightly. During lunch at school, she spotted Uncle James's truck in the parking lot. She climbed in, tears streaming as she recounted the morning. He reassured her they still had the footage. But when she returned home, her phone was gone from her backpack. Marcus had it. He'd rummaged through everything, cracking her cloud account password in just 3 attempts. He forced her to watch as he deleted the notebook photos, his fingers jabbing the screen with cruel satisfaction. He said Uncle James's copies were useless without the original notebook to authenticate them. The photos could be dismissed as fakes, he claimed. Any decent lawyer would argue they were edited without the physical notebook for handwriting comparison. The bar footage was different, he admitted. It came from an official security system with timestamps. But journal photos? Too easy to manipulate. That night, her mother announced Sophie was leaving for boarding school on Monday. It was a place to fix her supposed delusions about Marcus. Her mother had already contacted the school. They were ready for her. It was 1,000 miles away in the mountains, with no phones allowed and no outside contact for 6 months to avoid harmful influences. Sophie realized this was Marcus's scheme to silence her permanently, to make her vanish without raising suspicion. On Saturday morning, while her mother was out buying groceries and Marcus was in the shower, Sophie heard the water running and slipped out the front door. She ran to Lily's house and used her phone to call Uncle James. Lily's mother was at work, and Lily covered for her. Sophie was thankful. She told Uncle James about the boarding school. He instructed her to pack a bag and meet him at the library in an hour. But when she returned home, Marcus was waiting on the porch, his hair still wet. He'd noticed her absence. He grabbed her by the hair, her scalp stinging as he dragged her inside. Her mother wasn't back yet. He shoved her against the wall hard enough to knock down a photo frame. He snarled that she'd ruined everything, that he'd worked too hard for a meddling kid to derail his plans. He said her father deserved to rot in jail, that he'd orchestrated it all for months before the bar incident. He called her mother easy to manipulate, desperate for affection after her father took extra shifts to cover the house payments. Sophie asked why he lured that man into the restroom, needing his confession. Marcus let out a harsh laugh. He said the man was just in the wrong spot at the wrong time. Marcus had gone into the restroom to plant a bloody knife he'd prepared, one with her father's fingerprints from their kitchen. But the drunk man saw him setting it near the sink and started asking questions, getting too close. So Marcus said he had to silence him, fast and sloppy, with the same knife. When her father entered minutes later to help, it was perfect. The blood was still fresh. Her father's prints got on everything as he tried to save the man. In the chaos, Marcus swapped the murder weapon for another knife he'd brought, one untraceable to him. Sophie had been recording it all on Lily's phone, hidden in her pocket. She'd pressed record before entering the house. Marcus didn't notice, too caught up in bragging about his cleverness, wearing gloves, studying the bar's schedule for weeks. He said removing her father was just the start. Marrying her mother was a strategic move. Her mother had a hefty life insurance policy from her hospital job, and Sophie would bring in Social Security benefits if something happened to her, a car crash, a fall, or maybe she'd just get depressed and take too many pills. That's when her mother walked in. She'd returned early, having forgotten her purse. She overheard every word Marcus said, her face drained of color. She dropped the grocery bags, apples rolling across the floor. Marcus turned, realizing his error. He tried to backpedal, claiming Sophie had provoked him, that he was just trying to scare her into behaving. But her mother had heard enough. The truth sank in. Marcus stepped toward her, but she retreated, reaching behind her. She ordered him to leave. He said she was overreacting. She grabbed a chef's knife from the block and warned that she'd call the police if he didn't go. Marcus scoffed, saying she wouldn't dare. Too much embarrassment. Too much gossip. What would the neighbors say? But her mother's hand was steady, gripping the knife. For the first time in months, Sophie saw the fierce woman who once chased away her childhood fears and bandaged her cuts. Marcus realized she meant it. His facade crumbled completely. He snatched his keys and wallet from the counter. But before leaving, he turned to her mother and said, "This isn't finished." He claimed he knew too much about her. Her affairs before marrying Sophie's father, the money she'd siphoned from his account to cover her, credit card debts. He threatened to ruin her reputation if she went to the police. Then he stormed out, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled and more photos fell from the walls. Her mother collapsed, sobbing uncontrollably. Sophie sat beside her and played the recording from Lily's phone. Her mother listened to Marcus's confession, her face crumbling with every word. She kept apologizing. She said she'd been foolish, that she'd failed Sophie and her father. Sophie urged her to call the police immediately, but her mother was terrified of Marcus's threats, of losing everything. Sophie called Uncle James. He arrived within minutes, bringing the bar footage on a USB drive. They sat her mother at the kitchen table and laid out everything, the notebook entries Sophie had saved, the screenshots, the security footage showing Marcus's movements, the notarized witness statements Uncle James had collected. Her mother retched when she realized she'd been sharing a bed with her husband's killer for months, planning a future with him. She finally agreed to contact the police. 2 detectives arrived to take their statements, professional yet compassionate. They offered tissues to Sophie's mother and spoke gently to Sophie. They listened to Marcus's recorded confession multiple times. They reviewed the bar footage on the laptop. The detectives collected the notebook as evidence, handling it with gloved hands. One officer mentioned they'd already had doubts about Sophie's father's case. The forensic evidence had never fully added up. But pressure to close the case quickly had been immense. Marcus's recorded confession clarified everything. They issued an arrest warrant for Marcus that night. But he had vanished. His apartment was empty, cleared out hastily. His car was missing. The police assured them not to worry. They'd track him down. A patrol car was stationed outside their home as a precaution. Sophie and her mother didn't sleep that night. They shoved the sofa against the front door. They sat in the living room, lights blazing, flinching at every creak. The next morning, Uncle James called. His carpentry friends had heard Marcus was spotted at a motel 2 towns over, trying to pay cash for a room. The police were already en route. By midday, Marcus was in custody. He'd tried to flee but didn't get far. In his car, police found evidence linking him to the real murder weapon. He'd kept the actual knife for years, like a twisted keepsake, hidden in a locked box in his trunk. The knife from the crime scene was a decoy, but the real one still had traces of the victim's blood embedded in the handle. At first, Marcus denied everything, claiming the recording was fabricated with AI. He accused Sophie's mother of lying to shield Sophie, out of guilt over her husband's fate. But the evidence was undeniable. The bar footage showed Marcus entering the restroom. His fingerprints were on the true murder weapon, confirmed by proper testing. The forensic details that never matched Sophie's father suddenly aligned perfectly with Marcus. Even the wound angles corresponded to Marcus's height, not her father's. Overwhelmed by the evidence, Marcus finally cracked. He confessed fully in exchange for a plea deal. He admitted to orchestrating it all, to framing Sophie's father, to manipulating her mother. He even confessed to other crimes they hadn't known about, crimes in other states, other victims wrongly blamed for his actions. The detectives described Marcus as a serial predator who'd evaded justice for years, moving from town to town, always preying on vulnerable women with children. Sophie's father's attorney filed an urgent appeal with the new evidence. The judge reviewed the materials and ordered his immediate release. After 8 months in prison for a crime he didn't commit, her father was coming home. Sophie and her mother drove to pick him up. The drive was silent, save for the radio's faint hum. Her mother kept weeping, wiping her eyes with tissues. Sophie couldn't find words. Her chest felt tight with emotion. When the prison gates opened and her father stepped out, he seemed smaller than she remembered. Gaunter, older. His hair was more silver than black now, but his eyes sparkled when he saw her. She ran to him, wrapping her arms around him tighter than ever before. He smelled unfamiliar, like harsh soap and sorrow, but he was still her dad. He held her close, tears wetting her hair as he whispered how much he'd missed her.